Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. In this video we look at the Old Firm derby, which is regarded all around the world as one of the most fierce, historic rivalries that you will find anywhere. And they are absolutely right. It is. But outsiders like me just see the intense derby game. Unless you are actually from Glasgow, I don't think you fully comprehend just how nasty and hateful and deep this fixture runs. There has been multiple murders and attempted murders over this fixture. Back in the day, it was clashes between Celtic's firm, the Celtic soccer crew, and Rangers' ICF mob. I am a neutral, so in this video I will look at both sides. First we will listen to what former Rangers ICF top lad Sandy Chugg has to say about violent clashes with Celtic in the good old days. In his book, he gives a very honest and blunt account about his experiences and events that happened. Then we will have a look at violent clashes from Celtic's point of view. Once we have accounts from both sets of lads, we will then look at the true history of the Rangers-Celtic fixture and explain what happened many moons ago that made the derby so toxic and hateful. It runs far deeper than people realise. And like I said earlier, if you are not from Glasgow, I don't think you actually truly understand the history, hatred and divide between the two teams. Before we start, I just want to say that if you have a good football casual story to tell, or an away day story, then get in touch and I would be more than happy to feature your story in a future video. Before I jump into the violent clashes, here is a brief explanation of the history between Rangers and Celtic. The Old Firm is a collective name for the Scottish football clubs Celtic and Rangers, which are both based in Glasgow. The two clubs are the most successful and popular in Scotland, and the rivalry between them has become deeply embedded in Scottish culture. It has reflected and contributed to political, social and religious division and sectarianism in Scotland. As a result, matches between them have had an enduring appeal around the world. Between them, the two clubs have won 109 Scottish League Championships, Rangers with 55 and Celtic with 54, 76 Scottish Cups. Celtic with 42 and Rangers with 34, and 49 Scottish League Cups, Rangers with 28 and Celtic with 21. Interruptions to their ascendancy have occurred rarely, mainly in the 2 decades after the Second World War, from the years 1946 to 1965, when 5 other clubs won the league, and in the first half of the 1980s, with the challenge of the new firm of Aberdeen and Dundee United. Since the 1985 season, one half of the Old Firm has won the Scottish League every season, and in all but one of 17 seasons between 1995 and 2011, both clubs finished in the top 2 places. In the early 2010s, Rangers endured financial difficulties and its holding company was liquidated in the year 2012. Subsequently, the team had to apply for entry to the bottom 4th tier of the Scottish League. As a result of the liquidation, many Celtic supporters maintain that the current Rangers is distinct from the pre-2012 club, and the rivalry no longer exists under the Old Firm identity. Instead, they, and often Celtic themselves, use the more generic term Glasgow Derby to refer to the rivalry. While Rangers climbed back through the divisions, Celtic were champions in each of the next 9 campaigns. Rangers won the title in the 2021 season to prevent a 10th for Celtic, which would have beaten a record set by them in the 60s and 70s and matched by Rangers in the 80s and 90s. Celtic and Rangers have played each other 442 times in major competitions. Celtic have won 170 matches, Rangers 169 matches, and 103 ended in a draw. The clubs have large fan bases around Glasgow and Scotland and have supporters clubs in many towns throughout Scotland and Northern Ireland and in cities around the world. In the year 2005, the presence of Rangers and Celtic was estimated to be worth 120 million to the Scottish economy each year. Now we are going to hear from both Rangers and Celtic characters that have been heavily involved with violent incidents over the years. Let's start with Rangers and Sandy Chugg. This is taken from his book called Rangers and the Famous ICF. I will leave a link in the description if anyone is interested in buying it. I do highly recommend it. It's a good read, especially if you are a Rangers fan or follow the Scottish national team, or you just like the football casual culture, or like a bit of football history. This is what Sandy has to say about Celtic. When it came to Celtic, nothing was out of bounds. And I mean nothing. We ambushed their scarfers, trashed their pubs, took the piss out of their mob, invaded their heartland and threw them off motorway bridges. We even held slashing contests, with the gold medal awarded to the boy who gave the highest of number of their fans a stripe. I made sure I was always at the heart of the action for our encounters with the Soap Dodgers, and as I became more prominent in the ICF, I became well known not only to their mob, but also to whole swathes of their ordinary fans. As well as my penchant for attacking them, I am sure my reputation as a staunch supporter of loyalist causes got right up their noses. In the eyes of the ordinary, everyday Celtic supporter, I was public enemy number one. That was fine with me. I hated them. They hated me. With Celtic, there was never any quarter asked for, nor given. It was all-out war. Despite the size of their support, I never worried about retaliation. Their mob was only decent for a couple of seasons, and as for their scarfers, they would only fight when you pushed them into a corner, and only then if they had vastly superior numbers. So I felt able to have a go at them every chance I got, and not give a second thought to the consequences. Until, that is, they played their joker. Fed up with the constant attacks, Celtic fans contacted the IRA and asked them to shoot me. It was 1997, although I was then in the Scottish national firm, of which more later we could always pull a mob for old firm games. For years we had targeted the Celtic pubs in the Gallowgate, but the closed-circuit television cameras that now panned every inch of the street had made that impossible. We moved on to the Candleriggs area, just east of the city centre. Candleriggs also had a raft of Irish-themed bars that were popular with Celtic fans, and after we had played them, they would be full to the gunnels with their scarfers. Their mob was in terminal decline by then, but we saw their ordinary fans, many of them hardline Republicans, as a legitimate target. It was also a good training ground for the Rangers youth firm, which was pulling healthy numbers at that time. It gave them a taste of real football violence. It became a regular occurrence, panning in those pub windows and pelting the customers inside with bricks and stones. You might even call it a turkey shoot, simply because the pubs were so crowded that they couldn't get out of the way. And if a few brave souls did come out to fight, we would wire right into them. This went on for a long time. We thought it would never end. But, as sure as night follows day, there had to be a backlash. One day, Davy Carrick and I discovered that our names and addresses had been printed in a Republican magazine. I was outraged. It was a liberty, and it had potentially serious consequences for both of us and for our families. I phoned a friend who, ironically, was a prominent Republican himself. He had shared a cell with a good mate of mine, and even though my pal was in the UDA and the Republican was doing time for firearms offences, the three of us had become firm friends, which shows that you can reach out across the sectarian divide if there is mutual respect. "What the F is all this about?" I asked him. "Leave it with me. I'll see what I can do. But you've obviously pissed someone off," he told me. A couple of days later the phone rang. It was him. When he started speaking, I noticed it was in a very serious tone. "The good news is you won't be appearing in the magazine again. The bad news is you've pissed off some prominent Republicans because you keep attacking Celtic fans when they're having a drink. There was a pause, and then he delivered the news I didn't want to hear. Your names have been mentioned with a view to finding out how much it would be for you and Carrick to be sorted. To be sorted. I knew only too well what that meant. It was a euphemism for to be shot. He advised me to be careful about my movements, because he had information that thousands of pounds had been raised to pay someone, most likely an IRA soldier or associate, to shoot us. I was worried. Who wouldn't have been? This was a step up from football hooliganism. He was a player in the Republican movement, and I knew he was on the inside track. Despite my anxieties, it didn't stop me from attacking Celtic fans or their pubs. I was worried, but I wasn't about to give in to their threats, no matter how credible they were. I am still in one piece, and I probably have my Republican mate to thank for that. He phoned a few weeks later and explained that I was now off the IRA's radar. Whether he had persuaded them not to go through with the hit, or they had changed their minds for operational reasons, I will never know. As soon as he hung up the phone, I breathed an enormous sigh of relief. The attacks on the Candleriggs pubs did come to an end, but not because of the threats. By the late 1990s, the ICF numbers had dwindled, with many boys, including me, getting more heavily involved with the Scottish national firm. As I explained earlier, my history with Celtic's mob goes back a long way, to the time they nearly kicked me to death in Mitchell Lane. However, I was well aware of the potential for sectarian clashes long before that episode. That was because my brother Christopher would come home from a night's clubbing in the city and tell me all about the fights he had had with Celtic supporters. In the early 1980s, there was such a divide between the two sides that we even went to different nightclubs. Rangers used Viva in Union Street, which is now renamed the Cat House, while Celtic frequented Daddy Warbucks on West George Street. When the club spilled out at 3 a.m, there would be thousands of drunken young people on George Square desperately looking for a bus or taxi. Celtic would congregate on one side of the square, Rangers on the other. Mass battles would break out, with both sides backed up by gangs sympathetic to their cause. Postle and Springburn would side with Celtic, Barrowfield and other East End gangs with us. While the police had their hands full, shops would be looted. We targeted the ones that sold the good gear, like Olympus, although you had to be careful when you kicked the windows in, as they were huge sheets of plate glass that seemed to explode when they shattered. Chris's tales intrigued me, and I couldn't wait to go out clubbing and get into the fighting. By the time I reached my late teens, early 20s, I was a regular on the scene, and it was then I discovered just how dangerous Glasgow was. It wasn't just the neighbourhood gangs or the football mobs, there was also the troubles in Northern Ireland to consider. There is no doubt in my mind that what was happening across the water during the mid to late 80s made things infinitely more tense and therefore more dangerous in Glasgow. A good example of how gang, football and sectarian violence seemed to blend into one came at a Scheme concert in, I think, 1987. Despite his Irish Catholic sounding name, Joe Bradley was an ICF boy who also happened to be in the Postle Park gang and had gone to see Scheme at the Pavilion Theatre. A fight broke out with a gang from Barmulloch, and Joe was stabbed to death by one of the Barmulloch team, who also happened to be a prominent member of the Celtic soccer crew. No one knows why it happened. Was it gang-related, a football thing, or religious? Or Glasgow being Glasgow, a lethal cocktail made up of all three ingredients? The next day the ICF played the Rangers Soccer Babes at football. Quite understandably, we mourned Joe's loss, but it also brought home to us just how dangerous the city had become. We knew that we were targets for a whole network of gangs, and of course for the Celtic soccer crew, and that we could be attacked anytime, anywhere. There was another emotion, a hatred for Celtic, that had become even more intense, if that was possible. As I said, The Celtic mob was pretty good in those days, and I remember many battles with them. I would only have been 12 at the time, but one of the most talked about incidents came before an Old Firm match at Ibrox in 1985. We had arranged to meet the Celtic soccer crew at Kinning Park Industrial Estate, which is not far from the ground. We had a mob of about 200, and I will always remember the sense of anticipation as we walked down Paisley Road West. As we approached the narrow footbridge over the M8 motorway, it became clear that Celtic were as keen to get it on as we were. As they headed for the bridge, both sides picked up pace, and within seconds we were going hell for leather. A cry went up, "ICF, ICF, let's get into these Fenian bastards." The police, worried that someone would be thrown off the bridge, did their best to head us off, but 70 of us managed to evade them and met Celtic head-on. It was chaos on the bridge, where there was room only for 3 boys on each side, but despite the crush, we quickly swamped them and pushed them back to the other side of the motorway. Most of them managed to scurry back to safety. One wasn't so lucky. Amongst all the confusion, I heard a thud and looked down to see a Celtic boy called Joey Laird lying on a patch of grass. I suppose he was lucky. If he had landed on the concrete, he would have been dead, but as it was, he suffered brain damage. It was no accident. It wasn't because of the crush. 2 Rangers boys had lifted him up and deliberately thrown him off. As you might imagine, the cops were outraged by the Laird incident, and it was all hands to the pump to find out who did it, or the Glasgow police, being the Glasgow police, to stitch some poor fella up for it. And that's exactly what they did. After rounding up dozens of ICF and taking us for interview at the Procurator Fiscal's office, it became clear that they were intent on putting Barry Johnstone in the frame. Not because he did it, it was nothing to do with him, but because he was our top man and probably the most feared hooligan in Scotland. We stood firm. Every single one of us stonewalled them, and no one was ever prosecuted. How did we feel about Joey Laird? To be perfectly honest, most of the boys were buzzing. They felt it was a right result. Me? I knew Joey and had mixed feelings about what happened to him. While that was an interesting day out, I had been too young to make a real contribution. 2 years later, however, after another Old Firm encounter, again at Ibrox, older, bigger and stronger, I really came of age, not least in the eyes of the more experienced ICF boys. It was January 1987, which would make me 14. After the game, we met the Celtic soccer casuals behind Ibrox Primary School, and a vicious battle broke out. There were no cops around to break things up, so you had to choose whether to get into the fight or to cower on the sidelines. It was one of those situations that define you as a hooligan. We had some Chelsea boys with us, members, it was said, of Britain's toughest mob. Don't make me laugh. They stood and watched, paralysed with fear as it went off. Those hard men from London took one look at the reality of Old Firm violence and stayed in their front row seats. That was their choice. That was how they would be defined. Meanwhile, the teenage Sandy Chug got wired in. That was my choice. That was how I would be defined. It helped cement my reputation, and afterwards our older boys were full of admiration for the game wee yob who had gone toe-to-toe with Celtic. As the 1990s dawned, there was no let-up in the war between us and Celtic. One night we would be looking for revenge for an attack on our boys. On other nights, they would come looking for us. It was a deadly game of tit for tat, one that could easily end in tragedy. That is the way Glasgow was in those years. It may sound melodramatic to say that it was like a war zone, but for many guys of my age, on both sides of the fence, that's exactly how it felt. Trouble came out of nowhere. It could happen anytime, anywhere. You had to be on your guard at all times. There was no alternative. It was 1990. We still frequented different nightclubs. Celtic used Tin Pan Alley in Mitchell Lane, while we favoured the Hacienda, which is close to Glasgow Sheriff Court. This Friday night, no doubt enraged by another doing at the football, they came looking for us. We weren't there that night, but some of our associates were. It kicked off and the CSC got the worst of it, forcing them to butt out, chased by our pals. One of the Celtic boys, Gary Maguire, was cornered on the steps of the Sheriff Court. He had no chance. He was stabbed and left to die. The murder of Gary Maguire had nothing to do with the ICF. I even printed a newsletter explaining that we weren't anywhere near the hacienda that night. Later, a boy nicknamed Wee Semi was convicted of the murder and given a life sentence, and he was certainly never a member of the Rangers mob. None of that cut any ice with the CSC. They blamed the ICF for what happened to Gary, and after that, they were hell-bent on taking revenge on us. There were skirmishes almost every night, with boys on both sides getting badly beaten up. Glasgow streets were as dangerous as they had ever been. As time went on, however, we began to get the upper hand on Celtic, and by the end of the 90s, we were completely dominant, with our success mirroring what was happening on the field of play. In fact, the CSC deteriorated to such an extent that it rarely, if ever, turned out, even for games at Celtic Park. We didn't have a mob to fight, so there was only one alternative open to us: attack their scarfers. That was the period when we really turned the screw on the ordinary Celtic fan. We hounded them mercilessly, especially when we went to the piggery. I will never forget those days of glory when we left Celtic Park with a mob of 400, belting out "The Sash" as we celebrated yet another victory. Soon our thoughts turned to football violence, and we went through our full repertoire of war chants and songs. We walked proudly along London Road, went through Bridgerton Cross, past the back of the Barras, and down to the Gallow Gate, where all the Celtic pubs are. I have lost count of the number of times we smashed the windows in with volleys of bricks, traffic cones and metal poles. That was Rangers' point of view and their feelings towards Celtic, and incidents where the ICF have attacked or inflicted injuries, some life-threatening, to members of the Celtic soccer crew or their scarfers. Now let's switch it up and look into the damage Celtic have caused Rangers, starting with this article. A helpless dad recalled the moment he was battered unconscious by a group of Celtic fans before his son was set upon and allegedly stabbed after Sunday's Old Firm clash. The 54-year-old Rangers fan, identified only as Stephen, admitted he felt targeted as he and son Scott walked home on Glasgow's Hope Street after watching the derby match. The father and son pair feared the worst when they heard the Yobs chanting "Celtic Soccer Crew" before the vicious attack, and Stephen revealed how on another day cops could have been dealing with a murder after he was poleaxed in the back of the head. He told the Scottish Sun online, "I remember walking and seeing a big group of Celtic fans. They were chanting about Celtic Soccer Crew. Next thing I know, I'm basically poleaxed out the game. It was my leg that hurt the most, but I refused treatment because I thought it was maybe just ligament damage. But I have a fractured ankle and a fractured leg. I still don't fully know what went on. I must have been hit on the head if I've been knocked out cold. I can't be entirely sure what I was hit with, but whatever it was, it put me out unconscious. My instinct was that they had absolutely targeted us, that they were coming for us and nobody else. They pinpointed us and were coming to do us serious damage, and that's what transpired. It could absolutely have been a life or death situation. It was where you know you're getting attacked, and you were massively outnumbered. It was a helplessness feeling. We knew what was coming, and we knew there was no way out of it." He continued, "There's Celtic and Rangers rivalry, but this went beyond that, way too far. You could easily be talking about a murder here. No doubts about it, the potential is there. It was grim, but it could have been worse, much worse. We were so much outnumbered, and we didn't have a chance. I actually don't recall seeing Scott being attacked at all. I just have this vision of a number of folk coming towards us, and then I remember being woken up." Self-employed cleaning contractor Stephen has been told by docs his recovery could take up to 6 weeks as he struggles in a walking boot cast. And he says, The attack didn't just hurt him physically, but in the pockets as well, with work out of the question. He said, "My leg is absolutely killing me. I've got a few bumps and bruises around the face, as well as some scratches." Scott is suffering as well, of course. A wound like that, I must imagine, is quite tender. The knock-on effect, though, in terms of work and things like that, is awful as well. I'm self-employed, so there's no way I can drive a car, for example, because I'm in crutches because of this. The doctor says it could be 4 to 6 weeks until I'm fully healed up to be able to get anything done. Stephen says the assault has changed his perception about being out and about during Old Firm games in future. He said, "When I woke up on Monday, it's a natural reaction to think that I might not want to go out again in the city to watch an Old Firm game. As the day wore on, I've asked myself, would I want the attack to put me off going to watch Rangers again? I don't know for sure if it would. But at the moment, I'd be loath to go out in the town after an Old Firm game, especially at Parkhead." Cops confirmed that they attended the incident, but they only have records of one man being injured. A spokeswoman for Police Scotland said, "Around 9:50 on Sunday, September, the 2nd Police were called to a report of a large-scale disturbance on Hope Street, Glasgow. A 54-year-old man received serious injuries during the incident, but declined medical treatment. One man aged 31 was arrested on suspicion of assault and later released without charge. Inquiries are ongoing, and now, in a very cheeky recent move, the Celtic Green Brigade stole some of the Rangers' mob items and then mocked them. The Green Brigade has mocked a group of Rangers ultras after stealing their clothing, drums, flags and banners. The Celtic fan group infiltrated the Union Bears as they poked fun at their counterparts on social media over the weekend. The Celtic ultras posed for photos as they sang Rangers chants that the Union Bears would sing at games. The group took to their social media channels to reveal their haul, captioning the posts, "Loose talk costs materials." The Green Brigade wasn't finished there. As they showed an image of a sympathy card, they added, "To Union Bears, thinking of you all. GB kiss kiss." Then there was another recent clash when over 100 Celtic lads attacked Rangers. On February 26, 2023, hours before Celtic faced Rangers in the League Cup final at Hampton Park, Rangers supporters gathered to put up displays. Richard Logan, 44, and Gary Clark, 22, were both there, as around 100 Union Bears members were scheduled to be let into the stadium at 9 o'clock. Around 100 members of the Green Brigade turned up and charged at the group at full speed. The two supporters groups clashed on the footpath outside the stadium. Both Clark and Logan were at the front of the Rangers group when the disturbance took place. Police tried to separate the two sides as they continued to taunt and shout at each other, and fights broke out sporadically. CCTV captured Clark from Baillieston in a fight with another man. He was throwing punches. Logan was not fighting, but beckoning them before they clashed for a second time. During this, punches and kicks were thrown by others. I am now going to explain the history and formation of the Green Brigade to people that don't know who they are and what they are about. And then we will delve into the true deep dark history of Rangers versus Celtic. The Green Brigade are a Celtic supporter ultra group formed in the year 2006. They are situated in the North Curve corner section of Celtic Park. At a match against Dundee United in November 2010, there was serious disorder in the section occupied by the Green Brigade when a supporter was being ejected by stewards. Supporters charged at the security guards, and one was left with a bloody lip after a coin was reportedly thrown. In April 2011, at the Scottish Cup semi-final against Aberdeen, police officers attempted to remove a supporter who had set off a flare inside the stadium. Police were unable to remove the supporter because other fans held on to him. 4 supporters were later held by police in connection with the incident. more than 100 Green Brigade members walked out of the stadium in protest at the arrests. In April 2011, some members of the Green Brigade were not sent season ticket renewal forms after the club threatened to disperse the group around other sections of the stadium. UEFA Head of Communications William Gaillard, when talking about the matter in 2006, said that chants related to the IRA were not sectarian and was a nationalist issue similar to fans of other clubs, such as Barcelona and Athletic Bilbao, who support nationalist movements in their own countries. He also stated that in Balkan countries, some fans show support for political organisations that had engaged in ethnic cleansing, which is a different situation because those organisations are by their nature discriminatory. He said that, in his opinion, this did not apply to the Irish Republican Army IRA. Former Celtic manager David Hay has called for singing of IRA anthems to be banned, citation needed, while another former Celtic manager, Neil Lennon, has also repeatedly said that the chants embarrass the club. During a match at Celtic Park between Celtic and St Mirren on 11th February 2023, the Green Brigade displayed a banner reading, "VAR decision. Douglas Ross is a cunt," targeting assistant referee Douglas Ross, who is also a MSP and former leader of the Scottish Conservatives. At a match against Aberdeen in November 2010, the Green Brigade unfurled two banners with the words, "Your deeds would shame all the devils in hell. Ireland, Iraq, Afghanistan. No blue-stained poppy on our hoops." This protest was against the placing of the remembrance poppy on Celtic's shirt for the match against St Mirren on the 11th of November 2010. Celtic expressed disapproval of these protests, saying they were damaging to the image of the club and its fans, and pledged to ban those involved. The Glasgow Herald reported that in the weeks leading up to the incident, the Green Brigade had stepped up pro-IRA chants. Celtic have been investigated by UEFA in the past for alleged sectarian behaviour, including pro-IRA chants. In the year 2011, UEFA and the Scottish Premier League SPL investigated Celtic over pro-IRA chants by fans at different games. UEFA fined Celtic, while the SPL took no action, as the club had taken all reasonable action to prevent the chants. In response to the murder of George Floyd, the Green Brigade supported the Black Lives Matter movement and changed a number of street signs in Glasgow, renaming them after prominent black civil rights leaders and activists. On Celtic's last game of the 2011-2012 season, the Green Brigade organised a display of solidarity with Palestinian prisoners on hunger strike. This featured a banner reading, "Dignity is more precious than food," alongside Palestinian flags. A spokesman for the brigade stated, "We did this in solidarity to raise awareness, and because it's the right thing to do. We want Palestinians to know we are thinking about them and encourage Scottish civil society to look at the injustice in Palestine." Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.